couple of things before we start. Again, I'm going to put out an appeal to people to give me quotes. I'm almost there getting this list together of all the quotes, which I'm going to send out as a general list. I've had some very good responses, but again, I'm just waiting just for a few more. I'll make something nice and then I'll send it out to everybody who wants. And secondly, to mention again about my daily halacha list that I'm sending out daily an MP3 file of a halacha yomit, the daily halacha, which is no more than about 2 minutes long. So it's a 2-minute long attachment, MP3 attachment to your email. If you want to send me your email address, I will gladly add you onto the list. Once again, my email address is rabbikelati@gmail.com. And the previous shurim for Parashat Noach are from 3 years ago. There but for the grace of God go I. From 2 years ago there was a shir called Rain Man, and last year there was a shir called Window in Your Soul. So listen to those, they're all on Torah anytime. Okay, so Parashat Noach, Kates Kol Basar, the end of all man. We see how the world, over a period of 1656 years, degenerated to such a despicable level that Hashem himself had to destroy them. So they were degenerate. Degenerate is the word. They were degenerate. And it was up to Noach to regenerate mankind. And then we see ultimately he also fell from grace. He also became degenerate to a level because, let's talk about Noach within the shir. Okay, so what led to this degenerate behavior? Why did mankind stoop so low? What did they do that merited total destruction? So we've talked previously about the idea of people stealing small amounts from the marketplace, taking a bean here or a pea or something like that, something relatively worthless, not even worth a pruta, a very, very minor amount that people wouldn't miss. And we've given various answers over the years. Here's one answer that I saw today, very simple answer. Why was this so bad? If you were part of a generation that was involved in debauchery and murder and incest and all the worst things you could ever imagine, why was this idea about them stealing tiny amounts from other people, why was that the straw that broke the camel's back? The answer is because, one answer is because they wanted this to be an excuse to show them how good they were, to show them that they were really blameless, at least in their eyes. Because what did they do? They said, look, you can't put your finger at us, we're not thieves, we're tzaddikim. Because we wouldn't steal a large amount, we would take something relatively worthless. So therefore, you see how caring we are for our fellow man, in that we wouldn't dream of ripping him off, but we would, take something relatively worthless so he won't miss it. So they used that to show how careful they were with other people's feelings. Now, how ludicrous is that? They're busy doing unspeakable averot, which would make the worst, most immoral person in our generation blush, and yet they consider themselves very worthy and like upright citizens. So this is why the blame was pinned on this very minor act of stealing very tiny, insignificant amounts, because that was their excuse to exonerate themselves from any blame. Okay, that's one idea. For other ideas, go see hear some other shiurim, and there are plenty, not just on my shiurim, there are plenty of answers to this. And another thing, we're always seeing comparisons between Noach and Avram Avinu. We say there are two opinions about Noach. One opinion is that if he would have lived in the generation of Avram Avinu, he would have been so much greater than he was, because in Noach's generation there was hardly a good person in sight. All the good people had died by the time he went into the ark, and there were only Rishaim left, the worst Rishaim. So if he would have been in Abraham's generation, he would have flown, he would have been shining, a shining tzaddik, much better than even he was in his generation. The other opinion says no, he was only tzaddik in his own generation. Had Noach come to Abraham's generation, he would have been relatively insignificant. So there's a lot of comparisons between Noach and Avram. One comparison I saw, which I hadn't seen before, is that the main difference between Noach and Avram is that Noach served Hashem with fear, and he chastised his fellow man with fear. But yet Avram Avinu served Hashem with love, and he was the icon, the perpetuation of love for his fellow human being. So Noach was all fire and brimstone, if you excuse the pun. So he was shouting and screaming, which he should have been. But as well as the shouting and screaming, there should have been also the invitation to come for Shabbat. The invitation, come and join me, and let's spend some time together. I'll show you the beauty of Hashem's world. And there should have been that kiruv. There shouldn't have been just the chastising. There should have been the drawing forward, the love. Avram Avinu was kulo ahava. He had his tent open on four sides. He was forever having guests over. He was like a one-man Eshet Torah, or also mayor. He did it all by him and Sarah Imenu. So that's the difference. Noach was fear, and Avram Avinu was love. Now I'll tell you something very interesting about the people of the generation of the flood, who the Gemara in Sanhedrin tells us have no share in Olam Haba. Now you've got to be pretty bad to the bone to have no share in Olam Haba, because everyone deserves a little bit. They were among the select few who had nothing. Literally, there was nothing waiting for them at the end of the tunnel. Nothing. So, what did they do that merited such a terrible decree on them? And apart from that, there's something very interesting that's applied to an interesting term. Now, for that, we're going to have to turn back to the last, or rather the penultimate pasuk in Bereshit, the Parasha of Bereshit, which is Perek Vav Pasuk Zayin. It says, Vayomer Hashem, and God said, Emche et ha'adam, I will erase, I will blot out the man Asher Barati, which I created. Now that word Emche is a very strong word. I mean, you would think God would say, I'll kill the man who I created, or even I will destroy, ta'abed, la'abed. What is this word Emche? Emche implies that a person is completely destroyed, like down to the atomic level, completely, which is exactly what happened. Because when the rain came down, it was like an acid rain. I mean, that's putting it very mildly. The rain was boiling hot, and also the waters that came up from the deep were so boiling hot that it literally burned the flesh off their bodies, and probably burned the bones as well, ultimately. And that's what Noah had to look out for when he was in the ark. He had a window there, and he looked out, and that's what he saw. He saw people's flesh, people's bone. I'm sorry to get gory, but this is what happened. This is what happened. He was watching wholesale carnage from his boat. And in a way, that was his punishment. That was Noah's punishment, because he could have averted it by being a bit more like Avram Avinu. So his rectification was he had to watch this onslaught happening outside his very door, outside his very window. So, why this word emche? And I'll make it even more perplexing. I'll tell you that this word emche, probably some of you have twigged where I'm going to go with this. The word emche is used somewhere else in the Chumash to another type of people. And for this we have to go look at our Chumash. We have to go to Sefer Shemot, which there's a good few weeks to go before we get there. We look at the end of Parshat Beshalach. We'll see there in Pasuk Perek Yud Zayin, Pasuk Yud Daled. So that's 17:14. It says here, Vayomer Hashem and Moshe, God spoke to Moses, Ketov Zot Zikaron B'Sefer V'Simbol Zeh Yeshua. Right, basically tell Joshua, Ki Macho Emche Et Zecher Amalek. Because God said, I will surely erase the memory of Amalek. Amalek is the nemesis of the Jewish people. The only other nation, the only other people, apart from the people of the flood, who Hashem commanded, you have to totally erase them. Like, you know, in the old science fiction movies, when somebody gets hit with a laser, 1 minute he's there, one minute he's not a trace, nothing. So this is what we have to do with Amalek, and this is what Hashem did with the generation of the flood. Why was that? What did they have in common? You have to understand, there must be a common link for Hashem to use the same phrase twice. And here it is. By the generation of the flood, they did something very unique. It was, well, I say unique between them and Amalek. It was a common denominator. It was unique from any other nation or any other people in the world. They acted as if Hashem wasn't there. And if Hashem doesn't count, I'll explain what I mean. Let's go back to this idea that they were punished ultimately for stealing a pea or a bean from their fellow. Let's say a fellow had a box of beans, they would come and just take the one. So why was that so bad? We said originally because this was an excuse to make out as if they were righteous people and this is the only thing they were doing. But if we look a little bit deeper, what possible benefit would you get by stealing one pea or one bean or one little niblet of corn? What are you going to do? You're going to make a small chulent? What is this? The answer is, they weren't stealing because they wanted to have any benefit. They were stealing because they were stealing just for the heck of it. Flagrantly stealing. Now, I don't benefit from it. I'm stealing because I can and because I desire to steal. I don't need to have any benefit from it. I'm just stealing because I'm going through this life, doing what I want, saying what I want to say, being who I want to be, and I couldn't give a stuff about anybody else. That's what they were like. They were totally and utterly reckless. Now, if you're acting like that, they were so spiteful that they literally had absolutely they were wanton sinners. If they were like that and they cut Hashem out of the picture, look to what ultimately it led to. Now, again, what I'm going to say now is not for the faint-hearted. It is from the Midrash. I believe it's from Bereshit Rabbah, but don't quote me on that. But there is a Midrash that tells us what happened when the rain started to fall. And then they realized what was happening. What did these people do? Remember, these people were not regular people, they were giants. And giant people have giant children. So what did God do? God made it rain, this hot rain from Shamayim. And additionally, Hashem opened up from the ground, like volcanic eruptions, geysers they're called. Geysers from the ground. It was, they were releasing boiling hot water from the ground as well as from the sky. So what did these people do now when the water started coming from below? They did the unspeakable. They took their own children and they pushed their children into the holes in the ground to staunch the water. Now this, to us, is absolutely horrific. And we can't even imagine such a thing. A man and a woman brings a child into this world and he kills a child. I mean, it does happen in our days. We hear about things like this. But we're talking about a people en masse taking their own children. We're talking about people who were not psychopathic. They were not mentally ill. They were the norm in those days. They were the run-of-the-mill Joe that you find in the street. They were the man about town. He took his child, he used the child to bung up and staunch the flow of hot water so that he could save himself. That's called recklessness. That's called wanton sinning. That's what happens when you take Hashem out of the picture. And your life is only for yourself. It's all I. I need this. So that's what it leads to. Now let's look at Amalek. What was Amalek famous for initially? Because they were the ones who came out of the blue when the Jewish people were at the zenith of their success story. They'd seen the 10 plagues, they were taken out of Egypt. Literally, they were flying. They were flavor of the month. The Jews, they were untouchable. On comes Amalek, totally unprompted. No reason whatsoever. They had no axe to grind. They had no vendetta. Nothing. They just wanted a good ruck. They were spiteful. So they came and they started killing the Jews. For what? Because we can. Because we want to. Because we fancy it. That's what they had in common with the people of the generation of the flood. There was no reason. Because everything is happenstance. Everything is b'mikreh. Everything is just, there's no God, there's no world to come. There's just the here and the now. And if there's a here and now, we'll get on with it. Who cares who we trample in the process? So what happens when you have a people or a nation who decide that they just want to act the way they want to act without any fear of recrimination, without any fear of what their action might do, just trampling through? Well, Hashem says, you cut me out of the picture, you make out as if I'm not there, then I'll make you like you're not there. I will destroy you totally. Emche et zecher Amalek. You shall destroy, utterly, erase, like they never existed. Not just them physically, or even spiritually. But it says in the Torah about Amalek, even their memory has to be erased. It's like they never were. You would ask, do you remember Amalek? I'd say, who? What? Who are they? I don't know who they are. Total destruction, total erasure. That's the commonality. That's why they were both described with the same phrase. And to take it a stage further, why were the generation of the flood destroyed with water? They could have been destroyed with fire or thunderbolts. Can you imagine watching that? Thunderbolts firing from heaven, hitting people, killing people on the spot. Or what about the people of Sodom and Gomorrah? How about if they just have like sulfur and brimstone, falling from Shamayim? What about setting wild animals on them. There's cows. I mean, Hashem doesn't lack methods to destroy. So what was so significant about water? Now we know this from our studying of the parasha every week. We know that Hashem acts midah keneged midah, measure for measure. So it was befitting for them to be destroyed by water. The Gemara tells us various reasons why water, because they caused water to flow from them, because they were immoral, so therefore they were destroyed with water. There are various other reasons the Gemara brings in Sanhedrin. Here's one reason you may not know. Water is something which cannot be contained other than in a container. If it doesn't have a container, it is totally unrestrained. If you pour water on the table, it won't pile up in a nice pile like you're pouring sand on the table, or you're pouring ketchup on the table like our kids do. Yeah? It's going to flow all over the table. Not the tomato ketchup, I'm talking about the water. There's no restraining. It has no boundary. Now if you pour it in a cup, it's contained. But without any utensil, then it flows everywhere. And that was a perfect punishment for the generation of the flood, because that's what they were like. They were totally unrestrained. They had no boundaries. They didn't make themselves a kli, a vessel to contain restrain themselves. They just did what they want. Trample here, trample there. I don't care who gets in my way. I'll do what I want. So they were punished with water. And then there was one person who didn't want to be part of this. And he was Noach. Noach matzachem b'nei Hashem. He found favor in the eyes of Hashem. He went against the grain. He stood up to these people and he built a boat for 120 years. He could have probably done it in a year. I mean, if you look at the dimensions that are given explicitly in the parasha, you'll see perhaps this could have been done very quickly. One answer is given is that Hashem told him, take 120 years. He took 120 years. He didn't vary from the brief that he was given. He didn't go off the agenda. He did what he was told. He was told to take certain materials. He took those materials. He was told to take it, to make it this long, this wide, this high, this deep, whatever. That's what he did. He followed the plan to the letter. That was Noach. Why 120 years? Simply because to show everybody else the end of the world is nigh. To quote the people carrying the sandwich boards who walk around, the Meshuggahs, yeah? Or maybe they're not Meshuggahs. Maybe that's what Noach was doing in his time. His boat was his sandwich board. He was walking around saying, you're going to die. It's not going to be long, only another few years. Your flesh will be burned off your bones. And of course they laughed at him. Because they were saying, we only stole a pea. What did we do? We were so magnanimous. We were so generous, philanthropic to our fellow man. They must be coming to destroy you, Noah, because you're the only madman around. We're normal. You're the one old man building a boat for some stupid holocaust that you think is going to come. You're just deranged. So he stood against all those people. And can you imagine the abuse? I mean, we get worried when somebody abuses us for 5 minutes. What are 120 years of abuse? We can't even imagine such a thing. So he took all that and he was saved. But unfortunately, although he got to the stage from degenerate to regenerate, he got back to the stage of degenerate. Because what happened when he came out of the ark? Instead of planting wheat, instead of starting a brave new world, instead of building that future from the bleak ruins that he saw, he became enveloped by the bleak ruin that he saw and became depressed. What does somebody do when he's depressed? takes to drink, takes to smoking drugs, or even worse, injecting drugs, takes to gambling, whatever it is. So there was no casinos in those days, there was no drugs in those days, but there was the grapevine. And he planted the grapevine, and we know from the Midrash the miracle occurred, and after one day he had Palbin number 10. And he drunk, and he drunk, and he drunk, and he debased himself. What a fall, what a terrible indictment of somebody who reached such a height and he fell so low. And I won't go into it now. We know what happened with one of his grandsons, did something terrible to him, and he was uncovered in his tent, and the whole story happened then. That's the way not to do it. Now let me share with you the way to do it. There was a rabbi who you may or may not have heard of. I've talked about him several times before. His name was Rav Yosef Kahneman, commonly known as the Ponevezher Rav. The Ponevezher Rav came through the Holocaust. He saw the most terrible destruction. I didn't go into all the stories of the Holocaust, we all know them. But nobody can experience those stories so vividly and realize what they are, what they were, without actually going through it themselves. And that's what the Ponevezher Rav did. He went through it firsthand. And he came out. He could have come out of the Holocaust and he could have broken down and been depressed and given up on God and whatever. And nobody would have judged him for that. Nobody can judge anybody who's gone through that type of, seen that type of carnage and that type of destruction. Nobody can judge them. But he did exactly the opposite of what could have been expected of such a man. Instead of leading to destruction, he went and he built. And he built the Ponevezher Yeshiva in Israel against many people at the time who criticized him very harshly. And we know the famous quote that he said, which I would like to use in my quote list. He said, "I may be sleeping, but I'm not dreaming." And he carried his dream forth, and to this day you see the Ponevezher Yeshiva in Eretz Yisrael. But he had another quote, because somebody said to him, "Why are you doing all this? How can you have the strength to go and raise charity for your yeshiva and go to the ends of the world, even for a few dollars, and yet you saw this and your family perished, and you can come and you can build? What gives you the strength to do that?" So he said to the person, "You're right, I do feel depressed and I am devastated, but I've got two choices," he said. "Either I break windows or I build yeshivas. Either I go off the rails and be destructive like the generation of the flood and go and wantonly destroy and be a hooligan or a vandal and take it out that way, or I put all that angst and all that feeling, all that raw emotion, and put it into construction, and put it into the constructive, the positive." And look what he did. The edifice is there, it stands to this day. But he could have been a hooligan who'd been breaking windows. That's also a choice. He decided to build. And that was Noach's mistake. He didn't build. He destroyed, and he destroyed himself. Because the parasha doesn't only deal with Noach, it introduces us to that incredible character that we just mentioned before, Avraham Avinu. If we go forward to Perek Yud Aleph, that's Perek 11, we go to Pasuk Chaf Chet, Koach, 28. Vayamot Haran al Panei Terach Aviv. Haran died literally on the face of his father, or in front of the face of his father. The Art Scroll says Haran died in the lifetime of Terach, his father. But strange words are used here. Pnei. We should be inquisitive about these words. On the face of his father? In front of his father? What does that mean? And who was Haran? Well, Avram was one of three sons of Terach. There was Avram, who was the oldest. I believe the next one was Nahor, and the youngest was Haran. Now, Haran was not like Avram. Haran was not so frum, let's put it that way. But he wasn't so bad either. I'll briefly tell you what the Midrash says. The Midrash says that Avram Avinu was taken on a charge of wholesale idol destruction, because he smoked all the idols in his father's warehouse, and his own father took him to King Nimrod and said, look, I've brought you somebody who is an idol destroyer. So Nimrod said, okay, fine. So Mr. Abraham, you have to jump into the fire. I'm going to put you in a kivshana eish, and you will be burnt to a crisp. That's what happens when you disgrace the idols of your father. So Abraham was the first one who truly recognized Hashem. So he was willing to jump in the fire to make a Kiddush Hashem, because idols he knew were worthless, and he did that. And who was observing? His brother Haran. And Haran said, look, there are two very distinct paths that I can take in my life. Either I can go with Nimrod, the king, who himself made himself a god with a small g, and at the same time I can be loyal to my father Terach, who was one of the greatest idolaters in his generation, and that was saying something. Or I could go with the one God, with capital G. And that means following my brother Abraham into the fire. And he said, you know what? I'm going to hedge my bets. He was the first hedge fund guy. He sat on the fence and he said, let's see how this thing plays out. So he's waiting there. He's sitting in the bleacher seats, watching the show, watching his brother being thrown into the fire. He wants to know, what's going to happen now? Shall I bet? Shall I go to the betting shop and, shall I put, I'll get 2-1 odds on Avram? What should I do? He just said, look, I'll wait here. So he sees Avram being thrown in, and sure enough, Avram Avinu survives, and he's seen walking around within the flames. So Haran now says, hey, now I know what to choose. Now I know there's a God. If there wasn't a God, he wouldn't have saved my brother Avram. It couldn't have been the idols who saved him. There must be only one God. And with that conviction, now he knew, now he saw for sure, he decided to take action. He jumped into the fire and he was burned. Okay, so it wasn't quite a happy ending for Haran. And, we take this as an example of saying you have to have complete faith in Hashem, and you're not supposed to wait for proof, and all these things that we talked about previously. But I want to talk slightly differently than I have previously about Haran. I want to be Melamed Zechut, to judge him a little bit favourably. Because at the end of the day, if we look at ourselves as people who are people of faith, would we be willing, if God forbid, there was no choice, or there was a choice rather, would we be willing to jump into the fire to glorify God's name? I'm not talking about being forced, because that was what happened in World War II. They were forced into the gas chambers. They were forced there. And even though they were forced, they still went and they danced and they said Shema. We can't even imagine people of such fortitude, of such strength, and were so loyal to Hashem when the worst atrocities were happening. Can't even understand it. God forbid any Jew should be tested like that, or anywhere near that, God forbid. But we're talking about somebody who has a choice, and he makes a choice and he gives up his life for God. Would we do such a thing? I don't think that's very easy. I don't think it's an easy thing to do that. But Haran did it. Okay, he got burnt, but he took a measure. It took a measure of literally self-sacrifice. He thought he was going to get away with it, but he did jump in the end. So could it be he ended up with nothing? What was his reward? Hashem deemed that he did deserve a reward. Because who was Haran's daughter? Sarah Imenu. Sarah Yiska, who was the mother of all the Jewish people. And who was his grandson? Who was Haran's grandson? It was Lot. Now Lot wasn't very good, per se. He had some redeeming qualities about him. But he did give birth to two nations, Ammon and Moab. And one of them, Moab, eventually from Moab came Ruth, and eventually from Ruth came David HaMelech, and eventually from David HaMelech comes Mashiach Tzidkenu. So that was what, those were the two significant rewards that were given to Haran. So Haran wasn't just burnt and that was it, his memory was erased and we forget about him. Like Nahor, his brother, who remembers Nahor? Was Nahor, did he have anything good? No. The middle brother, nothing. He's mentioned in the Torah, and that's it. But Haran at least had a merit. He had Sarah Imenu, and he had the line of Mashiach Tzidkenu come from him. What do we learn from this? No good deed goes unpunished. That same mantra that we keep saying. And you see it in the Torah. And I'm going to finish now with a couple of stories. One is a mashal and one is a true story. The mashal is like this. It's all about what a person does in his life to improve his lot and to make himself worthy of Hashem's blessing. The mashal is as follows. There was once a din Torah, a court case. Now this was not an ordinary court case between one man and another man. This was a court case between a pair of shoes and a Sefer Torah. What am I talking about? Let me explain. There was once a herd of cows, and the herd of cows was once visited by a leather worker, a tanner. And the tanner came and he wanted to buy one of these cows from the farm. So he went, he selected a nice cow, took the cow, shechted the cow, cut off the hide of the cow, and he made leather shoes, beautiful leather Gucci shoes. And they were sold and finished. And what happens to shoes? People wear them on their feet and they walk around with them. Then another person came to the same farmer and wanted to buy a cow. But this person who wanted to buy the cow was a sofer, somebody who writes mezuzah, Torah, tefillin, and he wanted to find a nice cow that he could make. cloth from the parchment to write Sefer Torah. So he picked it with a certain cow, took the cow, again shachted the cow, got the leather, made it into parchment, and he wrote on it a Sefer Torah. So ultimately, in this mashal, the shoes had a very good case, seemingly, against the Sefer Torah. The shoe said as follows. They said, look, we come from the same breed of cow. We could have even come from the same cow. We were friends. We were all part of a herd of cows in the same pen, and we're all friends, and we're all the same. And look at us. We got made into shoes. People literally walk with us. We get trampled underfoot. And look at our brother or our sister cow. Look, she got made into a Sefer Torah, and it's put in the Aron HaKodesh, and people take it out on Monday, Thursday, and Shabbat, and Rosh Chodesh, and Chagim, and they hold it up high. When they do Hagbah, they hold it up high, and we get put low. So, how come we get where we are, and they get low where they are? Sounds like a good case, no? Lamay nafka mina, what's the difference between the cows that one gets a Sefer Torah, one gets a pair of shoes, lavdil? There is a fascinating answer to this. Because what happens with a Sefer Torah, it's not just you cut off the hide and then you make it into a cloth. There's a lot of work in between. You have to treat the hide. You have to shave it very thin. You have to put chemicals on it. You have to dry it, treat it with, make it so that you could have the ink on it. And it has to go through so many different processes, work upon work upon work. And then the sofa has to come with such accuracy, and he has to go to the mikvah, and he can't write Hashem's name unless there's kavanot, certain concentrations, and there's so many halachot. But what happens with a pair of shoes? You just cut it off, and you do a little bit of work in it. You just need thick leather, and you make it into a shoe. It doesn't require all that work. The same thing here should apply to us. If we want the reward of being like a Sefer Torah, that requires a tremendous amount of work. We have to work on ourselves again and again and again. We have to make ourselves a keli, or a various amount of kelim, of utensils, to contain ourselves. We have to give ourselves boundaries. We have to give ourselves goals as well as limits. We have to go for aspirations and make sure we stick to those aspirations. If we say something, we have to do something. I'm talking about positive things. If you say you're going to do a negative thing, just ignore it. But you say you're going to do something good, stick with it. Be a man of your word. But if you don't want to be like that, then you just be a shoe. Just be a sandal under somebody's foot. Be a thick-skinned person. Be like a pint of water poured over the table. You go anywhere. Be like a football. Get kicked here, get kicked there. No restraints. Beligvul. So we have to think what we want to do with our lives. Either we want to be a Sefer Torah, or we want to be a shoe. Both come from the same cow. The difference is to make the choice. Now I'm going to finish with a true story, which is told by Rav Yitzhak Zilberstein. It's a true story about a certain philanthropist who lived a number of years ago, a very wealthy philanthropist, who told Rav Zilberstein the story that this particular philanthropist was approached by one of these Gemach charities in Israel, and they wanted this philanthropist to donate some money towards the wedding of a young girl who was orphaned from her mother, Lorraine, and she was due to get married, and of course there was no money for the wedding. So this organization asked this philanthropist Can you help us to defray the wedding costs? And the philanthropist was so moved with the story that he undertook to underwrite the entire cost of the wedding himself. He just went, he wrote the check, he said, take it. The whole wedding is on me. Incredible act of a magnanimous gesture. And he decided he wasn't a person who just, paid the money and went away. He decided, you know what? I'm going to go to the wedding myself. And he went and he took part and he was Masamech, Chatan v'Kala. And at the end of the wedding, a very elderly Yerushalmi Jew came up to this philanthropist. And he said to him, Zabit, do you know what you've just done? You know what a mitzvah you've just done? Of course, the philanthropist knew what he'd done. He didn't want to shout and scream about it. He said, "Yeah, I know. I know it's a mitzvah. I'm happy to do it. Baruch Hashem, I have the means. I was happy to pay for the wedding." So the old man said, "No. It doesn't just stop at that. You do not know the story behind this family and about this girl whose mother had died and whose father was struggling to pay off debts, let alone pay for a wedding." He said, "You know, this family was once a very wealthy family. They were a wealthy and famous and righteous Yerushalmi family. And it was originally a husband and wife who were childless for many years. And they went at the time to a Rav called the Chabina Rav. And the husband went and he wanted to get a bracha from the Rav to have children. And the Chabina Rav, I believe it was after the war, he said he doesn't dispense blessings anymore. And the man was insistent. And he asked again and again and again, and he was relentless. And he didn't let it go. And the Chabina Rav said, okay. I can see you're sincere. I'll give you a bracha. But my bracha does not come easy. My bracha does not come to augment your mazal. You can't have this on top of everything you have. Something has to give. In other words, if I bless you with children, you will have to become poor. And I'm not talking about poor that you lose a couple of houses. I'm not talking about poor that perhaps you might not be able to go on the best holidays. I'm talking about evyonim, to be destitute. Because that is what I can see in you. I don't know how the Chabina Rav saw this. He said, if you have children, you will become so poor, you won't even imagine. So you need to make that choice. You want to stay as you are, and with your wealth as it is, or you want to have the children. And of course the man, without hesitation, said, I want children, my wife wants children so badly, we're willing to give everything up. Are you sure? Said the Rav. You won't be able to find money to eat even. No, we still want the bracha. And the Chabina Rav blessed them, and they had children. They didn't just have one child, not two, not three. They had 13 children. And they were well and they were wealthy up until they had the 13th child. And then what happened? Not long after the 13th child was born, the mother died. And then also the money started disappearing and they became very, very poor. And the old Yerushalmi Jew who was telling the philanthropist the story, he said, you know what? This wedding you paid for today, this was the 13th and final child of this family. And you paid for that entire wedding. You do not know what a mitzvah you've done. You will surely get rewarded from a Kodesh Baruch Hu. And the philanthropist was so amazed. But that's not the end of the story. A little while later, this philanthropist was pronounced with having a brain tumor. And of course, you have a brain tumor, there's no guarantees at all. But they treated it, and he lived and he survived through it. But 2 years later, he had a recurrence. And this time, the tumour came back with a vengeance. And this time they said, look, we're fearing the worst. But this man was a God-fearing Jew. He wasn't just a money giver. He was a God-fearing Jew. So he went to an organisation in Israel, and this is a worldwide organisation called Ezra Umarpeh. Fantastic, fantastic. God should bless everyone who's involved, paid or volunteer, involved with that organisation and similar organisations throughout the world. Because the work they do is unparalleled. So he went to them and he said, look, this is what I have. Can you find me somebody who can treat what I have? And they said, yes, we know somebody. There is a doctor who's willing to treat and make an operation for this tumour. But we can't let you go alone. I think I had to go to America to have the operation. He said, you cannot go alone. We need somebody to go with you, to coach you through it, to help you. He's a volunteer. You need to talk to him. Maybe he's going to give you counselling. He's going to give you advice, whatever it is. He said, fine, I'll meet the young man. So the philanthropist met with this young man, the volunteer. And he's speaking to the volunteer, and he finds out that this volunteer is the brother-in-law of the girl he helped pay for the wedding. Of all the people in the world. He said, now I know I'm going to come through this. And he did. The operation was a success. How does this happen? Because when you give, you will definitely get back. It's not a case of giving and that's it. You think Hashem forgets? You think Hashem just lets you do a chesed and that's it? Either it's going to come to you, or your generations that come, or generations that come after that. But Hashem has a tremendous reward for us, in store for us, who do even the slightest mitzvah. The mitzvah which we think, you blink and you'll miss it. So Hashem should surely bless all of us. Midah keneged midah. For all the mitzvot we do in our lives. No mitzvah is too small. Like some service providers say, no job too small. But there's no mitzvah that's too small. Even if you take a few steps to do a mitzvah, and the mitzvah disappears, you still get a reward for that. We can't even imagine the reward. So we should realize this and increase our mitzvot. We should be building worlds. We should be building and building like Rav Yosef Kahneman. And in the end, we'll find that we've built the Binyan Ariel. We should all be dancing there this year with Mashiach Tzidkenu, Mecheni Yosef and Amar Amen. Thank you for coming. Thank you for listening.